Welcome once again to Dialogue on Public Issues. I'm John Chowney with Campbellsville University, welcoming our audience today. Very pleased to be interviewing a person who really needs no introduction here on the Campbellsville University campus or in our community, the Honorable Max Wise, a Kentucky State Senator for Kentucky's 16th Senatorial District. Senator Wise, welcome back.
Good to see you, my friend.
Congratulations on your recent re-election.
Thank you. It's always good, when to be challenged. I think anytime you have an opponent in election year, it makes you have to get back out and do the work and not take anything for granted. But happy to be back in my seat to serve this 16th Senate District again.
Tell us a little bit, some of the audience may have forgotten, you have a rather large district and one that's kind of geographically diverse.
It certainly is. So the 16th Senate District is made up of 7 counties: Taylor, Adair, Russell, Cumberland, Clinton, Wayne, and McQuarrie counties. So got a lot of good tourism in my area. If you're looking at state parks and resorts. Also a challenge there with 4 central time zones and 3 eastern time zones. So my legislative aide in Frankfort's always having to ask me, which is slow time and which is fast down there.
Right.
So, but
well, she's got the terms down right.
She does,
yeah,
yes.
Eastern and standard, Eastern Central, just don't do it. You
That's exactly right.
Fast time, slow time, or Columbia time, Campbellsville time,
That's right.
and so on. That's the way you really understand it if you're from this area.
That's right.
Now, this will be your second term?
Correct.
And what are some of the highlights thus far? You're finishing your first 4 years. What would you say are some of the major highlights during the first 4 years of your term?
I've been very blessed. I've got to carry some really good pieces of legislation while I've been in Frankfort, and I've worked across party aisles. Worked in a bipartisan manner on some really good pieces of legislation. One of my first bill that I ever did was dealing with pediatric cancer research of our son Carter, and I said that when I went to Frankfort, you can't help but recall stories in your lives of seeing situations of, if I did this for one term or many, I wanted to at least look at establishing some research trust fund money for pediatric cancer. And then I was very happy to do that, working with Jamie Ennis Bloyd, who also was a native here of Taylor County. And with that, we've kind of taken it now that we got an earmark, $5 million last year put in of some money that can go towards the Research Trust Fund. And those are ways we're trying to collaborate between our flagship hospitals with UK and U of L, working together with pediatric cancer. I've also worked on some bills that dealt with education. I've worked with veterans programs of trying to get a certificate program to allow more veterans to become teachers in our public school systems, those that have a college degree. Try not to have those roadblocks for them in those different places. I've also, with conservative issues, defunding Planned Parenthood, with my pro-life stance. I campaigned on who I am as a person, and I would be as a candidate. So I've been very blessed, to work with Kentucky Right to Life on issues up there with that as well.
Okay. Now, you've recently, the election for officers, officials in the 2019-2020 biennial sessions have been done by the Republican caucus. What will you be doing as far as leadership during this next 2 years?
I did not run for a leadership position, we've got a very strong leadership team, and I was very glad Senator David Givens is back in the mix. I do want to commend Senator Jimmy Higdon, who stepped away from his role as President Pro Tem, for Senator Givens to move back in there. Other than that, we didn't. We saw some shakeup of a new caucus chair. We elected Senator Julie Rocky Adams out of Jefferson County. I think it's great. I think for diversity for our caucus to put a Republican female in there. Senator Adams is going to do a remarkable job. She chaired Health and Welfare. Our shakeups are going to be chairmanships. And we've got some first termers that are now second termers. I had last year chaired Senate Education Committee. I will still remain chairman going into my second term. But we're starting to see Senator Ralph Alvarado assume Health and Welfare, Senator Danny Carroll, Economic Development, Tourism, and Senator Will Schroeder, who also is going to move in there as well with state and local government. So probably some new, more energetic ideas. Not to say we've had some bad things, but I think a lot of times when you have some shift, especially some young members that have been in there now 4 years, they're ready to kind of take the gauntlet and run with it.
Now, as chair of the Senate Education Committee, what are some of the issues that you will probably be dealing with in this session 2019?
Education always is a big committee to chair, and I've really enjoyed my time. It's allowed me to really work up in Frankfort on some good policy issues. We're probably going to look at the pension issue is not going to be an education issue, but it's an education component. That will go through mostly likely state and local government. But I think when you look at education, tenure reform could be a possibility of going down that avenue. Tribunal reform, restructuring of site-based decision-making councils. We also are going to probably get some things that are coming over from the executive branch. That as the legislative branch, we may not be in the same unison pathway with them. Graduation requirements for high school graduates. I think we want to make sure in Kentucky we have a high bar set, but that bar's not unrealistic.
That proposal from Commissioner Lewis is gaining quite a bit of debate, isn't it?
It certainly is, and I appreciate their boldness of wanting to say for Kentucky we're going to have a benchmark. Once again, I'm all for benchmarks, but every district education-wise in Kentucky is different. Macquarie County is not the same as Fayette County or Boone County. We just know there's differences there. I don't want to see that we have high school students that are being limited, that they can't graduate because of an exit exam.
Right.
I think it's based off the student as to what they're able to achieve and graduate with. We want to see that every student can cross that graduation line. At the same time, we don't want to say it's a freebie by any means.
Right.
But we've got students with some that's going to be able to pass an exam easier than others.
Some students simply do not do well on standardized testing.
Exactly.
And this would be a standardized test.
Exactly.
Of some type.
And I would rather make it a competency-based test of maybe more practicality. Allow that student to demonstrate, if he's at the vocational school, that he can do a project that could beat anyone else. That's a graduation requirement, not just saying, well, here's the exam, here's what the ABCs, reading, writing, and arithmetic, you got to pass. Once again, I'm all for standards, but at the same time, fairness in those standards.
It's interesting that we're having a discussion as a state about a comprehensive graduation test to get your high school diploma, and many colleges and universities, including those in Kentucky, are moving away from ACT and SAT as mandatory points of entrance.
And also with the state of making the ACT mandatory at that junior year, senior year, that's a cost. You're looking at a state probably $12.5 million for the junior class to be able to take the ACT. We've got to think, is that a cost-effective measure? And could that $12.5 million go to something else within education and not just for ACT testing? So, but I think these are all good discussions. It's a 30-day session. You've been around, John. In a 30-day, it's fast and furious, and you've got to have things lined up. I think the biggest thing for education this session is school safety.
I was going to ask, that was going to be my next question.
I do think that we can get into the weeds on policy, on a lot of those other things, but truly school safety. We've seen Marshall County, we've seen the past in Heath High School and others in West Kentucky. We almost had another school shooting in Anderson County, which by the grace of God that we were able to foil that one with good work of state police and a constituent up in New Jersey who alerted it. We did the right things in that situation, but at the same time, we were very fortunate that we did not see another mass attack. But
now you and Representative Carney are co-chairing a school safety commission or council. Tell us about that work.
We have worked on this since May. We left last session where there was a push by the governor and by the executive branch for us to do a school safety bill. We simply didn't have the bandwidth last session to have done that with what we did with pension reform and tax reform and everything else. We felt it was best with our leadership teams of both the House and the Senate to form a school safety working group to made up of 16 people, 10 legislators, 6 ex officio members, and 2 kind of co-consultants. Those ex officios are a superintendent, a principal, a teacher, a student, the commissioner of Department of Criminal Justice Training, as well as we also have the co-commissioners are John Akers, who heads up the Center for School Safety, and also the former head of the Tennessee Office of Homeland Security who worked on school safety. We put together a great team of people. We've traveled the state. We've been in Trigg County, Barron County, going to Prestonsburg this month. We've also been in Fayette County, and we've listened to everybody. It's probably been, for me, one of the best experiences to truly listen to all the shareholders and come up with what we think school safety should look like. Once again, this will be comprehensive, but it will not be the cure-all, be-all bill. There's no way you can stop an evil act from occurring, but we need to focus on mental health. We need to focus on relationships between teachers and students. And we also need to look at school resource officers. We have seen an increase since Marshall County, from about 215 school resource officers to about 407. More communities are getting on board with this, but we also know around an event, that's where everybody kind of gets hyped
Right.
up, and then you kind of drift away from that after a while. So I'm hoping with school safety, we have a very good comprehensive bill that can look at all these different aspects.
Like many most public policy issues, there's no silver bullet
No silver
for school
bullet.
safety.
No,
Simply arming teachers that some would say will solve the problem, that
No.
will not solve the problem.
Exactly.
So, as a matter of fact, it could complicate the problem, at least in the view of some people.
You're exactly right. We've even had we have a student on the working group, and she spoke up. She's a student at Dunbar High School in Lexington, and she said, I see the problem not so much as hardening as softening the approach on school safety. I think that's a very good point, you know, when we have to look at this. And mental health is a huge issue.
Most of these cases, if not all, there are deep mental health issues
Right.
in play.
The tough part of this is anything in Frankfort is funding. If we're going to fund this, we're in a non-budget year, so there's probably going to be some things that we're going to have to request for 2020 when we open up the budget, but we need to hire more nurses. You know, we need to hire more people that can do the type of counseling. We also
Right.
have now telehealth, where we can go online and visually have, you know, social workers and students converse, that you don't have to hire somebody within the school system. So that may be a cost savings way to do this as well.
Now, as we do this interview, the Kentucky State Supreme Court is reviewing the pension bill, the constitutionality of the pension bill that was passed and approved in the 2018 session.
Right.
Basically, as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, the question is not the content of the law. That is not, at least the circuit court did not rule
Right.
the content or substance of the law to be unconstitutional. It was the procedure involved.
That is exactly
Explain
correct.
to us what the court has said and what would happen. What are some of the impacts if the court does declare that bill unconstitutional?
Yep.
Above and beyond just the legislature having to go back and deal with that issue again.
Right. Very good question. So you're exactly correct. It's a procedural issue, not so much the content, but it was how it was passed in the hurriedness that it was passed. Bills must receive 3 readings in their entirety. What happens typically in Frankfort, bills are read 3 times by title only. So you have a state like Mississippi, I'll use for an example. They'll have a recording where their clerk will read a bill and they turn it on the smallest volume as possible, but bills are continuously read. But if we were to read every bill in its entirety, we probably wouldn't get through much of a session being able to actually get things moving. So we're going to look at, that's what the court's looking at, is how it was passed. Was it giving a full reading? Was the committee called in a hurried fashion? And then also, was it an appropriations bill? And if so, did it have enough members supposedly to vote for that? So if you had 47 members, you got to have 60 if it's appropriations bill. We didn't have 60, you had the 47. So that's
In the
another,
House.
exactly, in the
In the
House,
House,
excuse
not
me,
in
in the
the
House,
Senate.
not in the Senate. So those are things that I'm sure the Supreme Court's going to run into. The issue you get into is this. We do a committee sub situation of where you have a bill and you attach a bill to another bill. That's gone on for decades and decades in
Right.
Kentucky government. But if they were to say that's unconstitutional, we could look at all the bills that have passed. CARA in the 1980s, we could look at heroin bills, we could look at criminal justice bills, and we could say, well, we did a committee sub on those, even though they may have passed 138-0. If someone then wanted to file a lawsuit, if there's a group that didn't like CARA, didn't like education reform, the Supreme Court then may have another case on their hands where somebody says, well, they did it the same way in the 80s as it was done with this bill. All of a sudden, you've opened up Pandora's box.
Right.
And so I don't know how the court's going to rule on this. I'm not a lawyer, not a constitutional scholar. But whatever way they come about this, we're going to have to look at the bill itself and say if they rule against it, that the legislature is in the wrong on this. I personally think we need to take it up as one of the first bills and get this thing out. If we allow it to continue to sit out there and fester, it's going to be hard to pass that bill. And I will tell you, we passed it before and it was a very tough bill. It's probably one of the toughest things that any legislators had to deal with up there. If we don't do something again about the pension system, we are fully funding it and it's showing improvement. But at the same time, if we don't change this in a way that it's sustainable, we're going to have more retirees and current teachers coming to us if it goes bankrupt saying you had the opportunity to fix it and you didn't. So we're probably going to be fragmented in the legislature. Some will say let's do the same bill. Some will say let it go bankrupt. And then some new members that have never voted on it could say, I'm not touching that issue. I saw what it did back in my home counties. I'm not going to do anything with it. But I do think the way the elections went in November, there's a growing sentiment of people out here that think Kentucky's moving in the right direction. We have to take care of our physical budget. We have to take care of our own checkbook. And if we've got something that could be going bankrupt, we better be funding it and better be making changes to it.
If the Supreme Court declares the bill, the pension bill, as it was called, some called it the sewer
Exactly.
bill because it was originally, the original legislation had to do with
Exactly.
wastewater systems.
Correct.
But because of procedural problems, issues, it's thrown out. Does that throw out the funding, the full funding of the system, as well as the changes that were made pursuant?
The funding will be in a different mechanism.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the funding would
Yes.
stay intact.
Yeah, this is
Okay.
just the structure
Okay.
of the pension.
Okay.
You're correct.
Yeah.
It would be basically, we looked at the COLA issue for those that were retirees.
Right.
There was a 20-year threshold between those who worked more than 20 and less than 20, and then also the sick leave, the sick time. So that's the real crux of what
Right.
the core is of
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Now, what other measures do you think will be needed in the future, whether this session or future sessions, on the pension systems? And again, we have several different, we're talking
Yes.
about basically state employee system and the teacher retirement system. Just for the record, the teacher system is in a little better shape.
Correct.
Well, a lot better shape than is the public employee, state employee retirement system.
That's exactly right.
But we have several systems out there. Will additional measures be needed in the near future? Let's assume the court leaves the bill as it is, and does not declare it unconstitutional. Are you going to have to do more work?
I think we're always going to have to do work on this issue. I think you're going to see, and you just mentioned it, I think the Kentucky teachers' retirement is improving. It's still not at 100%,
Right.
but to get it there, it's going to still take a while to get there. But it's showing signs of 56%, 60%. Kentucky employee retirement
Right.
system, 13, 14%.
Right.
But you don't hear so much about that one. That's the real solvency problem also. We're going to have to make a way that we can tie something into the pension system for revenue generation. I think once again this session, you're going to see some tax reform cleanup for nonprofits,
Right.
churches. That was a court issue of where Department of Revenue ruled that.
Yeah,
for
the
them.
legislature got blamed on
Yes,
that one,
yeah.
but it actually, I've heard it called BAM and Max's
Yes,
tax, and
yeah.
kidding.
Yep.
But for nonprofits, but that was not a legislative
No,
act. That
no.
was a court case as interpreted, correct me if I'm wrong,
Yep.
by the State Department of
That's
Revenue.
exactly right. Yeah, that was not a legislative issue, but we're going to have to go back for nonprofits, and we're going to make some fixes on that. So I definitely think this session, you're going to see for the tax reform bill that passed, there's going to be changes. Once again, I would also like on a tax reform bill, let's see up front what it looks like and not be in the last hours of session. I voted against the tax reform bill because
Right.
I'd not read the bill.
Exactly.
And we need to make sure as the legislative body, if we're doing these bills, here's what the bill is. Now, Senate Bill 1, Senate Bill 151, the pension bill, I'd read the bill. I knew what was in there. The changes that were made were no different from Senate Bill 1 to 151. We actually lessened it for 151 of what it was going to be. But at the same time, the tax reform bill, there's always unintended consequences of any bills.
Right.
But we need to look, we got to broaden the base. We know that with tax reform. Everyone wants us to get to the Indiana, Tennessee model, but that takes time to get there. We want to get to where we have no state income tax.
Okay.
We're probably going to see that we're going to raise sales tax to broaden the base, but you can't do that in one bill. You have to get there. Most people looked at the tax reform bill, and even though I didn't vote for it, it still lowered the state income tax down by 1.5%. So, there was a lot of services, landscapers, nail salons,
Right,
those
right.
tanning beds, and I got it. That's why I didn't vote for it. But at the same time, people also saw some help and some relief when it came to
Right.
the state income tax.
Well, again, I'm not defending or voting. I didn't have to vote, so I can say that.
Exactly.
Revenue, there had to be revenue from somewhere to cover the budget.
Exactly.
And the problem with the budget is nobody everybody wants the budget cut. 100% would say, let's cut the budget, cut out wasteful spending. Kentucky state budget has been squeezed and squeezed and squeezed for 12 to 15 years.
Yep.
And if you're going to solve the pension bill, somebody's got to come up with some revenue.
Exactly.
Now, I would agree with you that waiting, and I think even the proponents of the tax bill would agree, it was not good to wait to the last minute.
Yes.
But the option was ending the session with nothing.
Nothing. And we had left, the governor has the discretion.
Right.
So I tell all my friends that are in education and with the pension, would you have rather seen us pass a bill with tax reform in it, or would you rather have the governor with the option? And so that's the nature of it.
Yeah.
And
what other issues will be on the table for serious discussion? We discussed education issues and school safety in particular, but what else do you think will be major issues in this session?
You know, I could see where the House looks at something like welfare reform. A lot of that's going to be federal government with that, but I do think that we're going to probably look at some issues there of, with the 1115 waiver now, with the expansion of Medicaid, we're looking to put in there work requirements. But I do think the House is probably going to want to tackle something along those lines of welfare reform. I think the House is probably going to come also with sports betting, sports gaming, which I don't think that's a end-all, cure-all. The way we're seeing it right now is only about $15 to $16 million would be generated with that. So that's not a solution.
Yeah.
I know that the proponents out of Jefferson County and the horse industry, they want to see that, to go their way. But the NCAA, your university presidents, there's a lot of those pushing back against that.
Any serious discussion about expanded gambling, casino gambling?
I think
there's been a little bit. I think Attorney General Beshear came up with a proposal claiming it would solve the pension crisis.
Right.
Is that likely to go anywhere?
I think that's just something he's once again following in his dad's footsteps of thinking that's a cure. It's not. I think that probably hurt the cause more by him coming out to say that. I think another issue, just kind of talking out loud, medical marijuana. We're going to continue to hear that issue.
Right.
And it's just something that other states are doing. Not to say that I'm completely at a no or also at a yes. It's something that we need to still study.
It has legs.
It has legs.
The issue has legs.
Yeah.
Whether you're for it or against it, it's on the table.
It is.
And you guys and ladies are going to have to deal with it. We'll be dealing with it at some level.
And what we have to look with it is the parameters in place. Are we talking about those the end of life that have tried every type of drug, but there's nothing there that they can else do? PTSD, soldiers that have came back.
Right.
But in terms of someone saying, well, I've got a hangnail, I've got athlete's foot, I need a no, we're talking about parameters. But we also have to look at this, John, the workforce issue of that. If someone who's an employee is on medicinal marijuana but coming to work after having smoked marijuana, we are going to have to really get this thing correct. Other states have set up some models, and we're not talking, once again, recreational.
Right.
We're not going there as a legislature. But medicinal, we will have that discussion. We will.
Budget and revenue prospects. This is a non-budget session, but how are we doing?
Receipts are showing we're improving. I think what we did with tax reform, there's some improvement that's happening. I don't think we're going to open up the budget in a non-budget year.
It takes a supermajority to do
It sure does. I think the one area that the governor's going to try and push and want us to do is the gas tax. The proposal last year was raising the gas tax by a dime. I don't see you're going to have a whole lot of members supporting that idea. Now, we have to have infrastructure. We have to repair our bridges and our roads. But in a non-budget year, I would be very shocked if we open that up for the gas tax.
Right.
Yeah.
If you did, you would be opening up the whole road plan
Exactly.
and the whole shebang,
Exactly.
as they say.
Exactly.
Now that brings me to one of my favorite projects, and I always ask you this, but tell us about the status of the Heartland Parkway, and are you confident we'll continue making steady progress over time?
I'm very happy where we're at and where we're going. I think what we've seen now is the bypass we're talking about when you get over to the Taylor County, Adair County line. Some things have been put into play. We're seeing properties now being purchased by the state. The design, build, everything that we've been doing. I've been there for 4 years. Only do the road plan in the budget years, but we have really started to move in the right direction on this. I think, and you know as well as anyone, we have conceded to what was initially what was the Heartland Parkway to more of the 2+1, which financially I think is feasible.
Right.
We had the governor here recently, and I think that was even
Exactly. It was
discussed with him. It will open up for Amazon, for InFact, for this whole region. We hear that all the time. Right now, getting goods to people is logistical. We have to get it done. Seconds and minutes are valuable to those industries. And what we can look to connect with the Bluegrass, with the Cumberland, and it's also, I will say this, with BAM being now in his role, that is humongous to try and get these things moving in those directions. And it's also, like I said, dealing with our leadership too.
And as I understand, there is funding that you and BAM worked on in the current budget biennium budget for construction of Coburg to Campbellsville.
Yes.
Continued progress on phase 1 and 2 of the bypass, and then I think Jimmy Higdon secured funding for a portion between Lebanon and the county line.
That's right.
I believe.
That's correct.
That is to be constructed in 2019.
Yes.
I've run out of time. I've talked too much. Senator, it's always
Thanks,
good to
Brad.
be with you. This is John Chowning thanking State Senator Max Wise, our good friend and public servant, for being with us today for Dialogue on Public Issues, and thank our audience for also tuning in. Thank you.